Welcome to the third of our professional development seminar series. And we are thrilled to have a wonderful group of panelists with us. Let me first of all thank Terrence Rucker, who's provided fantastic administrative support to this event. Let me also introduce and thank Valerie Savior, the director of our Office of Career Services. And she and her staff are available to all of you as students for career advice and for any kind of assistance. And Valerie will be moderating the panel. And so let me hand over the floor to Valerie, and then she will in turn hand over the floor to our panelists.
Great. Thank you so much, Marlon. Thank you so much, Terrence. It's a pleasure to be joining you again. If you've been on these panels before, we like to survey you just to get a sense for our professionals where you are in your career exploration. So when you see that survey, please just fill it out, and then I'll just make brief comments to give our panelists a sense of the students on the call. Each panelist will have just about 3 minutes to get us started, and it's a tall order. We are asking that you introduce yourselves, tell us a bit about your current role, a couple highlights from your career journey that brought you to this moment in time, and maybe a key tip or skill that you think is essential for students with ambitions to do work like the work you're performing. And then we'll move to questions and answers, and in that time we find that there's plenty of time for the professionals to share more about their careers and their backgrounds. We are waiting, students, for one more panelist, Binyamin Regia, and he's having some technology issues, so if he's able to jump on, we'll just organically weave him into the conversation. So with saying that, I'd love to start with Heng Chee. Heng Chee, welcome. Please give us your 3-minute introduction.
Thank you very much, Valerie, and cut me off if I talk too long.
Okay.
Right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you wherever you are. This is Heng Chang from Singapore. I thank SolarSkyrise for the school for inviting me to this USC panel. I am both an academic and a diplomat. I began life as an academic university professor in political science, and for the last, shall we say, 24 years, I've been a diplomat. I was ambassador to the United States, and I was ambassador, permanent representative to the United Nations. When I was in the United Nations, I was also ambassador to Canada and to Mexico. So I did, this is holding posts concurrently. How did I get there? You know, I've done more than these two jobs, I have to say. I began as an academic, but to be an academic, first of all, as a student coming from a middle-class home, I had to help work myself through college. So I started as a stringer in a newspaper, a journalist, that is, who's paid 63.5 cents per square inch column in those days. And that was before I went to the university and during my vacations. I also joined an advertising firm and did some work in an advertising firm. So I understand the power of communication and the power of sound bites. Well, I went to the university, did well, had a first class, and then went on to be an academic. I guess what brought me to be an ambassador was the fact that I was what we would call today a public intellectual. When I was very young in the university, I would write columns in the papers, I would have opinions, and I was always, I was quite critical of the government, and so I attracted a lot of notice. But I was polite, and when I wrote, I guess they would consider me a constructive critic. I didn't want to tear down anybody, and I was never libelous. So that brought me a lot of attention. And one day the foreign minister invited me to lunch and offered me the job at the UN as the permanent representative. I hardly expected that because I had been critical of government. but this is Singapore, so things do happen. And I served at the UN, came back 2 years later because I had to come back for personal reasons. And for the women in this program, I would say, when I was posted to the UN, I think my marriage ended shortly after that, so I came back. Then I became ambassador to the United States, and that was 16 years in the United States. Today, I am back in Singapore. 8 years ago, I came back, and by the way, I'm old, okay? And but I'm active old and young old. And since I'm in Singapore, I am an ambassador at large in the foreign ministry. And as an ambassador at large, I do public diplomacy, and I'm often appointed an envoy. For instance, come this May 2021, I will lead Singapore's delegation to the Universal Periodic Review of Human Rights at Geneva, at the Geneva UN. As envoy, I just appeared last week before the House of Commons, the Foreign Relations Committee, to answer questions on British foreign policy in the region. I was asked by my ministry to do that. But that's just half my job. The other half, I am head of a research center. I set up the Lee Kuan Yew Center for Innovative Cities, and we do work on urbanization and finding urban solutions. And my university is a very technology-driven university. It was started by MIT in Singapore. And so I chair that center, scope research, look for funds, do research myself. And as a social scientist, I have a lot of fun talking to engineers whom I didn't understand in the beginning, but I've been reinventing myself. And so through life, I think I've been reinventing myself quite a bit. I think I should stop there.
Can we pause there and we'll learn more about your career later? Sorry to interrupt you. Thank you so much. And I think Terence is going to launch that survey now. So you should see that on your screen. And while you're participating in the survey, I'd like to go ahead and move on to Alisa, because our other three esteemed panelists all work at the same organization. Alisa, welcome, and please share your background with us.
Thanks, Valerie. Hi, everyone. My name is Alisa Kreynes. I'm actually a student at USC Graduate Program Urban Planning. I think I have a very different path of doing international work because I really got my feet wet in the projects right away before I even knew what was really entailed in doing international work. Right now, I work in renewable energy, more specifically in urban renewable energy. My company, which I have co-founded, transforms buildings into clean energy power plants. But it took me a few turns to get here, and I didn't always work in renewables. So I started my career by joining a small logistics and security services company, which was basically a startup, to work on a United Nations contract in a country called East Timor back in 2006, when it was pretty much still a war zone and was classified as one of the poorest countries in Southeast Asia. I had just finished my bachelor's then in political science and international relations, and found that the work I had in the US was fairly dry and boring, and I really wanted to get overseas and work on projects. So I joined a startup and I went to East Timor on a 6-month contract. And as much as it sounds really cool and romantic, it is a real shock when you go from living in New York City to a tiny island nation in the middle of the Pacific with no basic infrastructure or reliable power or transportation network or phone communications. But it was really rewarding, as you can really tell your work makes a difference and improves lives, which is why I really wanted to go and which is why I went and took on this job. So as I was managing this UN contract, I met a Canadian electric utility consulting firm that was brought in to train the local utility and help the Ministry of Energy with the development of their power sector. And eventually they hired me to project manage this contract, which was a 5-year-long, fairly involved management contract that really entailed everything from training the utility to helping the government develop their power system master plan. And for a growing new country, it's a really massive undertaking. So I ended up taking on this job, and that's really what got me excited about working in the power sector in the developing countries. I saw firsthand how having access to electricity transformed people's lives and a country's future. In the 5 years that we were there, we took the country from being 30% electrified to 95, which made it possible for kids to go to schools, for new hospitals to open, for new water and road network infrastructure to get built. Having power made it possible for local coffee farmers to have their own businesses instead of working on a Starbucks plantation. It made it possible for fishing villages to now refrigerate their fish and sell it to local markets. It was really rewarding to see the impact of the hard work. And I think that's what really attracts people to doing development work in the first place. You're really able to make a difference, and you can see the difference in front of your own eyes. So I ended up staying in Asia for a few more years and worked on several World Bank and Asian Development Bank funded projects in Indonesia and Nepal. And when I came back to the US, I decided that whatever work I pursue moving forward has to have a global impact. So I shifted my focus on renewables and climate change and helping cities meet their climate targets, which is what brought me to study urban planning at USC.
Wonderful. Thank you. What an excellent introduction. Terrence, I don't see the results of the survey. Were you able to launch it? Oh, here we go. Okay. Is the survey closed? All right. So to give the panelists a sense, 21% of the students on the call are either an undergraduate or in a progressive degree program, meaning they've come straight from their undergraduate into the master's program. 25% have less than 2 years of world of work experience. 30% almost have 2 to 5 years world of work experience, and a good quarter of the people on the call have over 5 years of work experience. So we're quite evenly distributed to give you a sense of who's on the call. Thank you. I also want to welcome Ben. Hello, Ben. My name is Valerie. I'm your moderator today. Thank you for joining us. Let's move on and go to Lily. Our next 3 panelists all work at the World Bank, and let's let Ben settle in and hear a little of your story, Lily.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for asking me to join this panel. My name is Lily Mulatu, although on my birth certificate it says Meskerem, but no one in my family has ever called me that. So I encourage everyone to call me Lily, as my parents did when I was born. I'm from Ethiopia, and I come from a very modest family, which had sort of relatively modest means, but sufficient means to put us through school. And I think that was more than any other assets that my parents invested in. They did not buy homes. We had a car, but it was definitely not a great late model car. But all 5 of us, 4 girls and a boy, had the best education that the country could offer at the time. And I think that my father had a famous saying, which was, I can't buy you 5 houses, but I can give you sort of the best education that we can afford, so that whatever happens wherever you go, you will not lose that. And I think that was incredibly wise, given that very soon after my 10th birthday, Ethiopia went through a massive communist revolution. And in fact, people with assets that were not attached to their brains really did lose much of that. And it became very clear that those of us who had an opportunity to go to school had something very much more valuable than even my parents had realized. My mother was just as committed to our education as my dad. And so here we are today. I started out in a small Catholic school, very quickly got a scholarship to go to an international school in Addis. And then when I finished high school at the age of 16, hung out for 2 years, courtesy of the communist government, doing odd jobs around the neighborhood, and in fact, participating in a literacy campaign for older women that completely set me up for a huge commitment to education myself, and a career in education and education policy in particular for the rest of my life. I was then able to get a scholarship to Mount Holyoke College, which is a small liberal arts college in Massachusetts. And quickly then moved on to the Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton, which is where I ran into Marlon. And then immediately right after that, going to the World Bank, which is where I am today. I started out as an intern at the World Bank, even though I wasn't a big communist as far as my own sort of formal identification, I was definitely a lefty. And the only reason that I agreed to go and be an intern at the World Bank in the Nairobi office was that Nairobi is right next to Ethiopia and Addis. And I figured that was the best way for me to go home. I couldn't afford to go home otherwise. And much to my surprise, it was the most amazing job that I could have ever imagined. And that was 30 years ago now. And I have not regretted that move to the World Bank since. I started out as a long-term consultant, was lucky enough to be accepted into the Young Professional Program, which is kind of a career track entry point for young people into the World Bank, and have since then visited or worked in 41 countries at last count. I have lived in 3 different country offices at 3 different times. The first one was Senegal, which I love so much that I came back to it 10 years, 12 years later. And in between, I lived in the Republic of Georgia in Eastern Europe, which was the most amazing other place that I would ever recommend. I want to say one word maybe about how to get to where you would like to go, how I got to where I got to be. If you'll allow me, I think it's just taking advantage of opportunities and having very few choices. If you're a foreigner in the US with visa limitations, you don't have time to bartend, to be a barista at a coffee shop. You don't have time to go on a backpacking trip across the country, although I did a little bit of that as a college student. You really have to plan your next step before your first step is finished, because there was no room for hesitation or choice. And in some ways, when I look at young people today, I look at family members and my godchildren and so on, I realized that having fewer choices was a blessing for me, that I needed to be well ahead of the game. I didn't have a chance to sort of question where I'd like to be and what I'd like to do. And as a result of that, I have been able to plan well in advance about where I would like to go. I've always had super clear vision about who I want to be and what I want to be. And I think that was aided by the fact that my choices were quite constrained. You know, in a little bit, I think one of the questions that I was asked to answer is how would you characterize your sort of policy for networking? And so I don't know, Valerie, did you want me to say something about that now, or
let's go ahead and move on and meet our other panelists. But yes, I'd like to hear a bit more about networking and a bit more details of what you actually do in your job.
Oh, sorry. One more thing, though. So I am what you would consider a practice manager in the World Bank. I cover education policy for 13 West African countries, mostly Francophone countries. And I manage a budget of about $2 billion, a portfolio of about $2 billion, and a team of about 30 people across those 13 countries.
Thank you so much. Wonderful self-introduction. It's so lovely to meet you. Okay, Nina, welcome. Thank you for joining the panel. Please share your background with us.
Sure. Thanks, Valerie. Hi, everyone. My name is Nina Yan. I am a transport specialist working with the World Bank, and I'm currently based in Beijing. I mainly manage transport infrastructure projects in China, and I work on a few other Asian countries. I also lead analytical work in these countries, providing technical advice to the national or local governments on improving efficiency or regulatory framework in the transport sector. Prior to the World Bank, I worked for an engineering consulting firm right after getting my bachelor's degree in civil engineering from Tsinghua University. 3 years later, my professor from Tsinghua approached me and asked if I would be interested to work as a short-term consultant for the World Bank Beijing office. So STCs, or short-term consultants in the World Bank, ranges from master students that are still studying in universities to senior experts that have actually retired from their career. So junior STCs are usually hired to assist teams to conduct background research or analytics or support task teams to draft operational documents. As an STC, I was involved in policy dialogues, in direct policy dialogues with very high government officials, such as ministers or sometimes even prime ministers. So this is a rare opportunity that one would never get, or one would rarely get if it weren't with the World Bank. So my bachelor's degree was in engineering, which helps me to get better engaged with the clients in technical discussions on engineering designs, on project designs, or to resolve issues within project implementation. However, as I progress in my career, I engage more with clients with senior leadership who are more interested in planning, in policy, or in financing elements of the project. So 2 years ago, I entered USC's Executive Masters in Urban Planning, which I really benefited a lot. So a tip for my career is I believe interpersonal skills is equally important in my career as technical knowledge. For the projects that we work on, we establish a task team that's consisting of experts from very different backgrounds and very different level of experience. So working as a team to provide support to the client requires a lot of communications and sometimes leadership without authority. So at the same time, we also work with very different clients from different countries, very different counterparts that have different background. So skills to be adaptive and observant is quite important. I'll stop here.
Wonderful, Nina. Thank you so much. Such a pleasure. So students, we're going to meet our final panelists now, and I would like you to start formulating your questions and sending them to Dominic or myself. If you can think of questions for which your peers can benefit as well, or broad themes that maybe two of our panelists can address, we can learn more about these esteemed professionals that have such a wealth of experience. Hello, Ben. Please share your background with us. Where are you?
Okay. Well, right now I'm in Yunnan province out in the countryside in China.
Okay.
Yeah, Beijing office is closed, so we just took a little holiday, and it took me a little while to connect to the internet, so I apologize.
No problem.
But thank you for the opportunity to join this panel. I think it's really exciting to talk to students and prospective career professionals. My name is Binyamin Regia. Full name is actually Binyam, like Lily, but I go by Ben mostly because Binyam in Amharic. I'm also from Ethiopia, like Lily. So when I came to the US in 1984, after graduating high school, when I told my name was Binyam to people, they couldn't pronounce it. And I said, well, Binyam means Benjamin, so you can call me Ben. It's the same thing. It's like Joseph, Jose. So that's how my name is Ben. So I did come to the US in 1984, and then I went to college at UC Santa Barbara. So I have a lot of California roots. That's where I did my undergrad. And then I went into PhD program at UC Irvine, where I met Marlon. And then, maybe a little bit about my career. So I started at the World Bank as an intern, as a summer intern. There is a summer intern employment program there. So I had always actually thought about working at the World Bank for some reason. Even when I was an undergrad, I had, my older brother worked for the Ethiopian Development Bank. He was the head of the development bank there, and he used to come to the US when I was growing up for loan negotiations and things of that sort. So I had always thought about economics was the field that I wanted to do growing up. And then when I was an undergrad, I had a professor who was teaching trade, and I really was very close to her. And I asked her about what majors I should study for graduate school. And she said, and I was leaning towards development economics, But at that time, development economics, methodologically, they were not very well advanced. When she said, well, you know, if you want to have a career in development economics, I guess she was thinking more on an academic career at that time, that this was not to go. Why don't you study, if you're interested in development, study something that you think is important for development, like infrastructure. I said, okay, I think that's what I'm going to do. So I did come to UC Irvine and studied economics, but with a focus on transportation is what I did. So when I joined the bank as an intern, and then later on after I finished my PhD as a long-term consultant, I think I was ready to do transport as an economist, because not many people actually do transport economics. We have a lot of economists in the bank and a lot of transport professionals, but not economists doing on transport. So that was really a good fit for me. And then I did that. And soon after, a year later, I was hired as a staff with the World Bank, and been now already 20 years since then. I've worked in many places around the world. I think I stopped counting at 30 at this point in time. I worked in South Asia, India, Bangladesh, those places, and East Asia. Right now I'm based in China. I'm the practice manager covering, well, until recently I was a practice manager covering China, Central Asia, Mongolia, and Korea. I oversee our lending and analytical program. We have about $10 billion in portfolio, about 25 staff, and a lot of analytical work, knowledge work that we do, many policy dialogue with various governments. I have staff working in different country offices. But I think soon I'm going to move to DC. Here is breaking news. Going to be the global manager for transport practice based in DC. So I'll be looking over our practice in terms of knowledge, expertise, talent, and policies and things of that sort. Yeah, so it's been quite interesting. I think it's a rewarding, development is a rewarding field. You really, really need to be passionate about it. You have to have a development mindset, really to succeed. So if you look at things from like almost from a missionary point of view, you know, I want to make change. I want to be at the forefront of these challenges that are confront you, and you will do it. You shouldn't, if you don't have that kind of passion to make a difference, to work with a lot of people from different backgrounds, different skills, different interests, because in development, it's not enough to just be a specialist in one sector. Even though you do transport or urban planning or education, whatever, you have to come across many things. I mean, even now in transport, we have to deal with a lot of, for example, gender issues. Most people don't think about it, but gender and transport are so intertwined, so important. So the ability to bring in many aspects of development and connect to them is what we need to do. So, but I'll stop here and then maybe talk a little bit more tips when people have questions and answers.
Perfect. Okay? Thank you so much, Ben. What a wonderful introduction. So thank you so much, panelists, for completing an impossible task, which is to share so much detail so richly in such a short amount of time. But we do have a good 26 minutes now to hear what's pressing in students' minds. I have one question, so I will start off. It's a long question, so I'm going to read it. Eric Chen asks, are there any specific cities or countries outside of the US that have exemplary policies or infrastructure in place to promote sustainability, public transit, or innovative design that you would like to call out? So cities outside of the US with exemplary policies or infrastructure in place that promote sustainability, public transit, or innovation. And then part two, do you believe these policies are feasible in the US due to our unique political and socioeconomic obstacles? So, you know, a really easy question right off the bat. Ben, do you want to tackle this? It's a transit-related question. He wants you to call out exemplary policies or infrastructure outside of the U.S. that are successfully promoting sustainability and public transit or innovative design. And is there any transferability of these practices to the United States?
Okay. Well, I think there are many cities in Asia and Europe that have done quite well in transit, even also in developing countries. So a few countries come in mind. One is Seoul, Korea, that has done very well in improving its public transportation system. It has moved from just kind of fragmented bus services to well-organized, privately provided bus system. We have Shenzhen in China that actually had electrified all of its fleets to electric buses, and it manages its traffic system very well. You know, it's a city of 7-8 million people, but you don't feel like you're in a very crowded city in the way the traffic moves. And then I think in Europe, if you're interested in non-motorized transport, I would go for Netherlands. And then in Latin America, you have a number of cities that have done very well in bus rapid transit BRT, like Colombo and Curitiba in Brazil. So it really also varies. As you can see from my answer, transportation infrastructure is so holistic. So you find bits of excellence somewhere in different subsectors, as opposed to solving all transportation ills in one go. So yeah.
And Heng, Chee, please contribute to this question.
Actually, I was going to say Singapore is often cited as a city which is sustainable, which really gets the transport right. And we are consciously using science-based solutions, technology-based solutions to solve our urban problems and urban management. One simple well, we have a mass rapid transit, MRT, but we also use what we call the electronic road pricing, congestion pricing. We were the first to do so. Other countries came to look at it. I think New York tried to implement it, and Mayor Bloomberg found that people in New Jersey complained. They weren't going to pay to get into New York, you know. So we tried electronic congested pricing through the electronic pricing, but now we are using satellites to do the pricing, you know, and you have a gadget in your car. Now, we are now trying to deal with urban heat islands in Singapore. We have a project called Cooling Singapore. The planners are looking at it. We have a project called Visual Singapore. And for those in urban planning, you would be interested because it's a digital twin of Singapore. You can look visually, and every road, every building, every lamppost, every tree in Singapore is in the digital twin. And it's a tool to help planners manage the planning of Singapore and find out scientifically, you know, what will the effects will be. You can model the place. So I think we do quite well. And I was going to name Seoul also, which has done very well, you know, and Japan too has done pretty well, you know, on this. Can it be transported to America, the United States? I don't think so, you know, because the United States believes in separation of powers, diffusion of powers, federal center, states and cities, different layers. And, you know, you can see the problems of whose right it is to do this, who builds the roads, who does, you know, who pays for this and who pays for that. So not easy.
Thank you so much, Heng Chee. Moving on, a couple people have already begun to touch upon this, but one of our students wants to know about pressing skills they should be focusing on in their education, either through internships or academics. I know, Nina, you talked about adaptability and other interpersonal skills. So Alisa, just a few skills that you think are paramount to being successful.
Well, I think you have to be if you're really going into managing projects and you're really interested in development work, you have to be really adaptive. You have to be really flexible, and you have to be really creative, because it's demanding work. It's very rewarding, but it is very demanding. And oftentimes, as somebody who runs a project on the ground, you have to really think on your toes, because not everything that comes out of the say the funding institution that issues the terms of reference and tells you how the project is going to go, ultimately you're the one on the ground who's assessing the capacity and assessing what's possible and how it is possible. And I'll just give you a quick example. As we were working on this utility management contract in East Timor, we received an order from the Asian Development Bank to roll out this very extensive program to train the operators. And this program included everything that the power plant operators needed to do. So, A to soup to nuts. And we looked at it and we said, there's no way we can do this, because it actually requires for people to understand electrical theory. And we're dealing with people who don't understand basic math. And some of them don't have the reading proficiency. So a lot of the times you really have to adapt, even though you're receiving, certain scope descriptions that need to be delivered, and they're very critical and they're very important, but they're not always that straightforward. And I think you have to be a really creative thinker, be prepared to manage risks. And some of those risks are going to be very different from the ones you encounter in developed countries. And you should never assume that things are going to go as planned. That would be my sort of very hands-on project advice.
Very well said, and the example helps bring the skill demand to light. Lily, perhaps just briefly, some skills you think are tantamount to succeeding in international development fields.
I think the technical skills are critical. And the problem with trying to pinpoint those technical skills is that in 10 years, the skills that are going to be essential are not skills that we know right now. In fact, we've done lots of research to show that the jobs of the future don't exist at this point. So the ability, I agree completely with Alisa, this adaptability is critical. But there's also some behavioral things that I think are essential for job seekers and people who want to grow in the development field. The ability to listen, and to listen with authenticity, not to listen so that you can figure out how to get your point of view in there quickly, not to listen with a sense that the people who are on the ground don't understand what they're doing, not to listen with a sense that if it's a Black person, if it's a person with a disability, if it's a woman, that somehow they are not to be listened to, or they're not to be respected as much as somebody who looks different. And so I think one of the biggest challenges we have as managers, and I think Ben would probably agree with me on this, is to try to find a way to match those technical skills with the type of behaviors that make us effective on the ground, that make us able to bring the top technical advice, but be in the mode of learning about the local context and local situations in a way that would allow us to actually implement them in the most effective way possible.
Thank you.
So yeah, that's what I would put.
That makes sense. We have another question. Jennifer, I'm wondering if I could call you out and ask Terrence to unmute you so you can ask your question directly if you're comfortable. Terrence, thank you.
Yes, hi, thank you. So I all of this is so interesting, and one of the questions that came up for me is, what is the World Bank policy influence in all these different cities with such different politics and economies? One would imagine, I mean, you all are so skilled, you can go into any environment and tackle, grasping all of the different factors that make up how to work in these different situations. And so how does the World Bank leverage influence to implement policy change and investment so that you can come into this environment, whether it's transportation or sustainability, and have an impact?
And who would you like to respond to that, Jennifer? Thank you.
Okay.
Who would you like to have respond?
Oh,
Ben,
I mean, everybody, like all of them are so
Let's start with Ben.
Okay.
Okay, thanks for that question. Actually, it's a very good question. So first, what you have to do when you go to a country or to a city is study the country or the city. What are the sector issues? So that when you speak with the minister or with the mayor or with the government, we are speaking from a point of knowledge. It's okay to have general knowledge about the knowledge you know from other countries, from the other practices, but you do need to have an in-depth study and in-depth knowledge of that country, so that it's an evidence-based discussion that you're having with your counterparts in the government. So that's one way of influencing, is to really bring about evidence and try to show them what it means to carry out a reform, what are the economic benefits and social benefits, and also what are the costs of these changes. Oftentimes, many governments are worried about undertaking any reforms or undertaking any new projects, the displacement it will bring in, the losses that it will bring into their people. So you also have to come up with a solution how to mitigate that. So having that kind of, I think, an understanding is important. Secondly, you need to be relevant to them in terms of the financial support that you provide. It has to be robust enough. It has to be good enough for them to undertake it. So we have different instruments where we try to talk about policy changes through financial support as well. But I think for me, the most important thing is to have the dialogue and to do the ex-ante work. And, we talked about the skills in the previous discussion. What I wanted to also add to that was about having deeper technical skills, but also broader understanding of what are entailed. So with that kind of thing, that also helps you with your dialogue with the government.
Yeah, we talk a lot in our field about sort of T skills, that importance of both breadth and depth, and it is challenging to do both. Nina, briefly, would you care to add to this discussion?
Sure. Having an understanding of the sector issues is really important. And at the same time, understanding the local situation is important. So in lots of our operations, we do a lot of public consultation with both the public sector and the private sector. We talk to the local residents, especially in improving urban transport sector. We try to understand what are their day-to-day challenges in transportation. And also we talk to local social groups, NGOs, to gain their support to the project too. On top of that, the World Bank also has safeguards policies that looks at environmental and social elements. We also have fiduciary guidelines that ensures procurement and financial management is conducted properly. So those we need to mobilize our colleagues and the teams to make sure that these rules are followed during the project.
Thank you. So I'm just going to do a little time management. We have 12 more minutes. We have 2 questions in the queue. I'd love to get to maybe 3 more questions. So one of our students is interested in mid-career changers, and I am struck by how long some of you have been in your roles and even started as interns. So what if you already have a rich career? How do you recommend they pivot if they're trying to enter this field from another field? And Liz, if I'm not asking this to your benefit, then please go ahead and unmute yourself if you want me to ask it differently.
No, that was perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. Anyone have a thought about entering this field mid-career, this profession, the transferable skills, or how to make connections?
I can give it.
Go ahead, Lily.
It's a really great question, because there's parts of this which can refer to your technical or even your behavioral skills that could be of a huge asset. But then you're walking into a culture and a culture of organizations that depend as much on networks and mentors and coaches that can actually guide your way forward, as much as it is your ability to contribute on the technical or even behavioral side. And I think mid-career entries into the institutions like ours, which is a ginormous bureaucracy, which has its own rules that are unwritten and its own behaviors that are only known after a while, it's extremely hard. And so I would say, that's the organizational side. But going into development is actually, as a mid-career, can be incredibly fulfilling, precisely because you bring such a whole host of skills. And the key is then to find the right institution that you can go into. If the culture of ginormous institutions is something that you are comfortable with, if you're coming from AID, the bank will not look that different. If you're coming from an NGO, it would look horribly different. So identify the culture that is actually aligned with the way you have worked up to date. Find the way to contribute into that development conversation using the skills and the experiences that you have. And always know how to, have your exit strategy ready. So how to discern whether or not this is a good fit for you, or whether it's not worth the slog and it's time for you to pivot to something else. I think this would be the way I would approach it.
Fantastic. That's great advice. So Alex Sarno has a question. Alex, hopefully it's a kind of question that we can get a couple professionals to touch on briefly before we wrap. Terrence, could you find Alex Sarno and unmute him so he can ask his question?
Awesome. Okay, it's great to be with everybody. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Alex Sarno. I'm a second-year Master of Urban Planning and Master of Public Policy student. So my question is centered on equity. So before coming to USC, I worked as a community economic development volunteer in the Dominican Republic for the Peace Corps. And my assignment was to work with the cooperative of freshwater fish farmers. And then sort of the secondary project was to work with the community at large. And so one of the difficulties that I found is when I was working with this cooperative, sometimes their interests were superimposed on the community in general. And so I felt like it was really difficult to advance equity in the community by working with this cooperative, especially given that I was entering into this community and it wasn't a community that I was necessarily a part of. So with that obstacle in working international development in contexts that you're not necessarily from, how do you, or how have you sort of bridged the necessity to implement an equity framework in the work that you do?
Great, thank you so much. Heng, Chee?
Was that Alex? Yeah.
Yes.
Alex, I know what you are saying, Alex, because right now my center is doing a research project in Southeast Asian cities. We pick, Jakarta, Manila, Ho Chi Minh City, and Phnom Penh. And we're trying to understand urban challenges from the point of view of city leaders and also from the point of view of people from the ground. And the priorities of people on top are not necessarily the priorities of people from the ground. They see things differently, They may not think the MRT is very important, they want, maybe the flooding to be taken care of. So you have differences there. How do you get equity? I think it's in different cities, in different communities, you have to get the conversation going. And I think NGOs do play a very major role in trying to bridge. And sometimes you don't bridge. At least I haven't seen very successful bridging, Now, there's been a lot of talk earlier by some of our colleagues from the World Bank, and everything they say is fine, but World Bank is not always well received on the ground, They would say, oh, World Bank, it's like a big bureaucracy is coming. And that's a reality. And there is a World Bank culture. And maybe the speakers, those who are from the World Bank may want to address that. And how do they reach out to speak to people on the ground? How do you close equity issues is a great question. I'm not sure I have the answer, and it's situation by situation, case by case. And I always feel, inequality is one of the biggest issues, and getting people from the top to understand what the ground wants is very difficult. And it's an issue we have to keep on working for all the time. And I'm not sure I know the answer to get the right way.
That makes sense. So I'm going to beg everyone's indulgence and ask if the panelists would linger for 5 extra minutes. I think that we're in a deep, lovely conversation, but I don't want to extend much past the hour. I do want to give Ben or Lily or Nina a chance to respond to the optics of the World Bank and how they land on countries as a courtesy. And then maybe I'll ask one last quick question of everybody and we'll wrap. So who wants to respond to Heng?
Okay, well, that was not an easy question, but anyway, let me give it a try anyhow. No, but so the World Bank is many things. It's a big bureaucracy, but it's many things for many people. It's a technical organization where many technical research and findings come out. It's a financial institution where we provide a lot of financial support and loans. It's also an institution where many policies are developed and recommended and I guess pushed through, you can say, that have benefits and costs. Like any other reforms that you do, it would have benefits and costs. But I think for me, when I work in a project or in a program, while I'm working with government counterparts, I always know that the client, the final beneficiaries are the people. So if you have that in mind, that you're actually serving the people, not the government that you're talking to in front of you, then you would have a different kind of mindset in terms of what you bring it into the table. So you want to know how this would affect the people. And the equity issue is, paramount. I mean, because our mission is to eliminate poverty is what we have when you enter the World Bank, that what you see in a big sign. So you can't lose sight of that. That's why I said in the beginning, in a work like this, you have to have a development set. You cannot be just only focusing on narrow technical field. Bringing in your equity issue into your projects by keeping in mind your clients are the people, not the government, is I think maybe what would help you to do that.
Thank you so much, Ben. I'm going to ask each of you a rapid fire question, and then I'm going to turn it over to Marlon to wrap up our conversation. And I also wish we had another hour because this is just the richest group of professionals. So my question is, how many languages do you speak? And how important is language acquisition or language multilingualism important in your role? So very brief response. Heng Chee, how many languages do you speak?
I speak 4, English, Mandarin. I speak dialect, Cantonese, and I speak some Malay. And I live in a multiracial, multilingual society, and it's absolutely essential. And it paves the way. And culture is so important, understanding culture. Skills you need to go and do development work, understand the culture, the history of the place, and the language.
Lily, how many languages do you speak?
I would say I'm perfectly bilingual between my maternal tongue and English, and I speak 2 other languages. I work almost exclusively in French, so I would say that I'm more than advanced in French, and I speak my mother's language, which is the Eritrean language. So 4.
And is there any hot languages you think students need to be studying to be prepared for the next 25 years of work?
It really depends on where you want to work. If I'm thinking about my kids, Spanish is essential. For people who want to work in development, Chinese probably is going to be a very important one. But honestly, it can be any language that opens doors for you.
Got it.
It really is contextual.
Ben?
Yeah, so I speak 2 of the Ethiopian language, Amharic and Tigrinya, and then, of course, English. I speak a little bit of Arabic, and then now a little bit of Chinese. Yeah, so, but I think so from looking ahead, I would say Chinese is the language that people should learn.
Alisa?
I speak 4. Russian is my mother tongue, obviously English, Indonesian, and Spanish. Now, English was actually the hardest to learn out of all 4. I had to learn it when I was a sophomore in college when I got to the US. So, but yes, languages are important. And cultural barriers will come up anyway whenever you go to work in a foreign country, but languages are definitely important. And I'd say Indonesian is equally important because that's another language that's really wide spoken throughout Southeast Asia.
Thank you so much. And then Nina, bring us home.
Okay, I speak Chinese and English, and I speak a little bit Japanese and German. I started to work on Central Asia, so lots of people, government language is Russian. So I'm actually thinking about learning it because I do feel the barrier of language, like relying on an interpreter, sometimes gets information lost in interpretation.
Okay. Wonderful. Well, thank you for indulging me. We know that people can enter this field if they're multiculturally competent, but we need to prepare and pick up language acquisition along the way as we can. Thank you so much for this rich conversation. Marlon, would you like to spend the next 5 minutes just closing us out from your perspective?
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you. The accomplishments of each of you on the panel, I am simply in awe. And every one of you, I mean, the level of experience that you've been able to bring to our students has been fantastic. So let me extend my heartfelt thank you. I know that in terms of time zones, this was difficult for many of you, and I greatly appreciate the effort you have gone to. I think we'll wrap up a little bit, and we'll probably afterwards ask you how students might be able to get some advice from you if they may. And to students, I would encourage you to take to heart what you've heard, have a plan, figure out how you'll move forward, and we are here to help. So thank you to Ambassador Heng Chan, Alisa Kreynes, Lily Mulatu, Nina Yang, and Binyam Regia. And Ben, I knew that you were hopeful about this promotion. Congratulations. And so wonderful news.